people without resources, people who are living with low income, often don't know that they have rights. They don't know how to protect their rights. They don't know what the law is that might be protecting them or how to ask someone to enforce it. And that's what legal aid is there for, is to step in and say, yes, you have rights. This is what they are. And yes, we will help you protect them.
You're listening to Granite Goodness, the podcast where we interview New Hampshire people making the world a better place.
Oh, Susie, where are you going now?
My name is Andy DeMeo. This episode was sponsored by and recorded in Treeline Outfitters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Today, I'm talking to Sarah Palermo. Sarah is the campaign director for the New Hampshire Campaign for Legal Services. We talk about chasing Ron Paul on a bike, how legal aid today prevents problems for tomorrow, Legally Blonde, the invaluable role of paralegals, using the law to serve human beings, and many other things on this episode of Granite Goodness. Sarah Palermo.
Hi.
Welcome to Granite Goodness.
Thanks so much, Andy.
I am really happy that you're here.
I'm happy to be here.
Why is that?
Oh, I am always excited when folks are taking a good news approach. I think what you're doing with looking for solutions to problems and looking at the people that are working on them is what we need right now more than ever. We need to know that there's solutions to the problems we're facing, and we all need to know who's working on it so we can find our niche and get involved.
That's a perfect introduction.
You're welcome.
Usually I'll start with something like, I'll explain what this is about, or the guest, but like you're doing my job for me. So
you're welcome.
That's a wrap. We're pretty much done. All set. So you are the 12th guest on this show.
Oh,
which feels
dozen.
Yeah, crazy and very exciting. And I will be honest, there was a bit of an uproar from my huge audience, which is basically just my mom. This is a New Hampshire-oriented show, Granite Goodness, right? We try and talk to New Hampshire-oriented folks. But I have to say, I got some pushback. People said, we need more New Hampshire. We need more Granite, emphasis, focus. So this is the first episode I'm recording since receiving that feedback, and that is going to be my opening salvo for you. Tell me about your relationship with the Granite State.
Oh, wow.
How did you end up here?
Okay.
Do you have a spiritual relationship with New Hampshire? What do you like about it? Just anything you want to say about that.
New Hampshire has been my home since 2007. I came here for work. I took a job at the Keene Sentinel just in time to get involved with covering the 2008 presidential primary.
Wow.
It was just the best experience working in a small local daily newsroom, covering international issues side by side with the New York Times and press from all over the world. There's no experience like it. I'm afraid that those days may be behind us in the way that the national politics works now is so much more digital focused, so much more national focused, but that's a story for another day. And I've really just been here ever since. Fell in love with a New Hampshire boy and kind of made our home in Keene for a little while and then moved to Concord, and we've been there since 2011. So I left media in 2015 and moved into a new role at the time with New Hampshire Legal Assistance. Uh-huh. It's also kind of the umbrella legal aid, civil legal aid.
Right.
And I've been there now almost 10 years.
Excellent.
Although I will say, when folks, if anyone, a native wants to give me any flack for being a newcomer, I grew up in Methuen, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I like to say I spent most of my waking hours in New Hampshire because
Sure.
the mall is in Salem.
Yeah.
And that's really just where I was most of the time growing up. So
Okay.
I took a little bit of a circuitous route, went away to New York for college and came back. But once I put down a little bit of root here in the Granite State, it hooked me. It's just a wonderful place to live.
What was your impression of New Hampshire before moving here? Like when you found this opportunity first, was it like, absolutely no question, I'm going to go? Or was it like, New Hampshire is this different place? Like, tell me your preconceived notion of the Granite State.
Definitely, I was looking at kind of being in the western part of the state from the beginning. I wanted to be either in the Upper Valley or in Keene, and those areas are so different than the New Hampshire I knew growing up, where it was mostly pavement and parking lots and strip malls
Right.
and not strip malls, big malls.
Yeah.
And the western part of the state, it's not far in terms of distance, but the time it takes to drive east-west in our state
Yeah.
is really significant. And it's really a world away. Those mountains on the southern border in Monadnock area really create this unique valley over there. So it was unlike anywhere I had lived before. And I think that was part of what hooked me, is I grew up in an area where you had to drive to get anywhere.
Right.
And living in downtown Keene, I could walk to breakfast, and from breakfast walk to work, and from work walk to the schools that I was covering as a reporter,
Yeah.
and walk to the offices of anyone I had to visit to report on something. And that kind of grounded you in the community in a way where you had to sort of noodle out how to get places without your car,
Right.
because it was just easier, and it makes you slow down and look around and see what's happening in a way where when you're driving, you're going too fast to see what's
Right.
changing around you day to day.
Yeah. Did you ever go to Fritz's?
Oh yeah, Fritz's. So you have to remember, almost 20 years ago,
Yeah.
the salary for a baby reporter, Fritz's was like a special day. When
Really?
we could afford to go to Fritz's. That was like someone's birthday. Oh yeah.
Interesting.
It was great, but it was reserved for special occasions.
That is going to reflect well on me when I share this anecdote. I worked at Fritz's for a summer. I did spend a summer living in Keene with my fiance at the time, and it was super fun.
Yeah.
It was like one of the funnest summers of my life.
Yeah.
But I had the job I was planning on doing didn't work out, and I was just looking for something and walked into Fritz's. I have to say, it was actually one of the best run kitchens. Like, I've worked in a lot of kitchens, and that kitchen was particularly efficient. I don't know if it was because of like the operation that guy has going. It happened to be all woman. Like, I was the only guy working in the kitchen. The rest of it was woman. So it was this kind of matriarchal like cooking environment.
Interesting.
And I don't know.
Unusual, I
yeah.
think, in a line kitchen.
Totally unusual, yeah. But worked very, very well. It was very efficient. I felt very at home.
Love to hear it.
Anyway, that's what we're here to talk about.
French fries.
Matriarchal cooking and French fries. Although I am curious. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and we were talking about, bemoaning the loss of like some of these hokey traditions around people running for president, right?
Yeah.
Like the stories that, they go to
Exactly.
the middle of nowhere in Iowa or New Hampshire. And did you ever see some of that? Like, did you see like Mitt Romney try to eat a weird hot dog or something like that?
Those ones don't stand out too much because I think like in the media, we all kind of know that those are like expected and
Right.
a little bit cliched. And so we tried to generate unique opportunities. So I remember the things that stand out in my memory are eating Thai food with Dennis Kucinich and his wife
No kidding.
in like a church basement
Yeah.
after an event. That was kind of the only time that they could squeeze in for our one-on-one interview. So that was one experience. They're both vegan,
Right.
or they were at the time. I don't know. It was a long time ago. I'm sure they still are. But so the Thai food in Keene was their option at the time. And then the other story that I really love to tell from my time covering the primaries is when I was at the Concord Monitor. So this would have been during the 2012 primary. I was assigned to cover Ron Paul.
Oh, yeah.
Because coming from Keene, I had kind of some experience with the libertarian movement in the state that's really got some strong roots in Keene.
Yeah.
So when I moved to Concord, I kind of carried that beat with me. And so they gave me the Ron Paul campaign because he was speaking to them pretty directly. And there was a moment during that campaign when kind of the national media generally was trying to make a little bit of an issue out of his age. Honestly, I don't remember how old he was at the time, but he countered by saying, well, I ride my bike for miles and miles every day in the Houston heat and humidity, and I challenge anyone to come do it with me.
Wow.
And then they started making a point of bringing his bike with him on campaign tour stops. Yeah. And they put it on his daily schedule. Like, okay, we're going to do this event here. We're going to have a media avail here. And then he's going to take an hour for his bike ride and then this next thing. And I was just like, can I come on a bike ride with him?
Yeah.
Completely not telling anyone involved, my editor,
of course not,
the campaign staff, that I haven't until that point ridden a bike since I was like 12. Like, it had been a solid 15 years since I had ridden a bike.
And you're going to keep up with Ron Paul.
Oh, I was absolutely terrified. I had to walk my bike to the place because it had a flat tire and I had no way to pump it.
Right.
So his staff had to help me pump it. And then I was just sort of on these back roads in Concord with him. And he was quick. He was in good shape and he was powering. And I had my recorder in one hand, you know, kind of gripping the handlebar and the recorder at the same time. And I would pedal really fast and catch up to him, ask him a question, and he would start answering. And then a car would come and I would drop back so we were single file and no one got hurt.
Right.
And then I would pedal really fast and catch up and record his answer. And it was tons of fun, but like
quite a workout.
It was quite a workout.
Yeah.
And I was so scared the whole time because like I had not ridden a bike for several years because I had crashed when I was like in middle school and it turned me off bikes. But it was the kind of thing that you only get that kind of experience at like a small daily where the editor was just like, sure, yeah, you want to go for it.
Right.
Great idea.
Yeah, if you can gonzo journalist catch Ron Paul
on
a bike.
Right. And we got some great photos out of it because like the Monitor has this amazing tradition of really high quality photojournalism. So, and you know, the small papers like that, they really encourage you to think collaboratively with your coworkers that work in other media. So that was a really fun memory. Those two stand out. And then I had another interview with Joe Biden when I was in Keene that stood out. Yeah, because he was running in the 2008 primary. And the tradition at the Sentinel is to do these meetings with the entire editorial board and the candidate as they're preparing to make an endorsement.
Yeah.
They have these very intense interviews, and it just was this intense. He had an intense relational quality. He was very like laser on you when you asked a question. Like you had his full attention.
Yeah.
And it just really stuck out to me all these years.
Right.
That's the kind of quality that I think a politician that's successful often has. Is this ability to make you feel like you're the only person in the room.
Right. Yeah. No, I think so, you know. And I mean, that's an incredible story. That's the craziest thing I've heard in my life. And it's extraordinary. I made a note to myself that I really I'm going to make you give me some of those pictures later. If there's any, even if I would take a picture of Ron Paul on a bike, if you're there with him, that would be incredible.
I'm pretty sure I'm not, but I'll look.
Yeah.
I'll make a note.
Yeah. That's going to be some important interview follow-up. You would like, I happen to get this book, because this is like a really interesting thread to kind of go down, and it is going to connect, but it's called Whistle Stop Politics, and it's about like another one of these bygone traditions of, you know, candidates, politicians in America used to take trains, right? They used to get on the train and they'd go and, you know, the whistle stop, right, as kind of a convention of campaigning. It's, you know, it's less now than it was, but some people have, like, I believe, Biden and Obama and a couple other folks in like the 2010s, they would do parts of their campaigns. They say, oh, well, we can take a train from there to there. Let's do a whistle stop, kind of like Harry Truman and all those folks used to do, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I feel like if you were a journalist, 60 years ago, you would be on, like, that'd be your beat. They'd be like, we need to get Sarah on the whistle stop train. No question.
Yeah.
So you shared with me, you're at New Hampshire Legal Aid now.
Yeah.
And you said your programs last year helped more than 7,400 people.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Does that number feel real to you?
It does.
Yeah.
What's hardest about that number is that I know, and the staff who are doing the work day to day know
Right.
how many more people they've turned away.
Yeah.
It is just this moment of really desperate need. But the people that we do serve, yeah, I mean, that is a lot of people. And some of them are getting like the full suite of services that they would get from any attorney's office.
Right.
And some of them are getting served by our attorneys or our paralegals at a clinic at a courthouse where
Yeah.
they're getting really triage treatment.
Right.
We try and use some of those terms that are more familiar to people from the medical world.
Right.
So that kind of clinic that has this triage, we are able to serve a lot more people who, in a lot of ways, would never have even known that they could have applied for legal aid.
Yeah.
And that has so many benefits on its own too.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I imagine it's a paradoxical relationship with, the network and community of people in need, right? Because on the one hand, helping 7,000 people is great.
Yeah.
But in some ways it's a symptom of, ideally we'd have to help nobody, perhaps, right? Like, is that correct to think about? Like, how do you think of yourself in this
So
landscape?
there's definitely some organizations where I think you'd love to talk about working yourself out of existence, right?
Right.
Solving the problem so that your program is no longer needed. But I think in our society, there will always be an imbalance of power.
Right.
And when you have an imbalance of power, you have injustice. And I don't think that there would ever be a world where you have the ability to resolve every problem without professional help representing you and your interests and helping you navigate the world of the rules that govern that dispute.
Right.
So I'm not sure that there's ever going to be a world without legal aid.
Right.
There will hopefully be a world where there's not my position, which is really doing fundraising.
Right.
I should probably not exist.
Yeah.
We should be able to have the resources for anyone who can't afford an attorney to get one,
Yeah.
to protect their interest in the cases that we do.
Yeah.
So,
No, that makes sense.
yeah.
Can you share a little bit tell me the story of how you got into all this?
Oh, gosh. So I was working in journalism.
Yeah.
And was finding that the work that spoke to my heart the most were the pieces I was doing on the New American community in Concord. There's a significant Bhutanese refugee community there, and I had done some pieces on areas where the mental health system was really broken, and people were finding a platform through these stories. They were finding that they had the ability to share their story, their experience with the community, a community that they felt didn't care about them, didn't want to hear their story, didn't want to ask those questions of them. And I was there to elevate them on a platform so they could share it. And the opportunities to do those were not always super easy
Sure.
to navigate. And at the moment I was feeling that, I saw this job posting for this very first time created job of communications manager for
Yeah.
New Hampshire Legal Assistance. And I went to them. I made it through a couple rounds of interviews. And at some point I said, you really don't need someone to be pitching your story to the media.
Yeah.
You just need to be telling it to your community directly. You need to be showing them that there's a problem here, but we are a solution. There's a housing, crunch. At the time, 10 years ago, we knew there was a housing crunch,
Yeah.
especially for folks with low income. And they're facing, if you lose an apartment, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Okay, so what can we do to prevent that? How can we be the prevention that is helping people stay in their homes, keep kids in school? There's so many different ways that legal aid is working to prevent problems from getting bigger or worse.
Right.
And so when I told them, you don't need to worry about the gatekeepers as much anymore. Tell your own story. Be your own advocates.
Yeah.
I think that's how I got the job. And so I started doing that, and within the year, I sort of moved into this role doing the fundraising as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. I mean, there's so much to love about everything you just said. Sometimes when people interact with your organization, New Hampshire Legal Aid, it's in the kind of triage mode, right? Of like, we're strapped, you're strapped, you're in need. We're going to try and find the best fit for what we can provide you right now and get to some modicum of a solution, right? But also hearing you talk about, no, so much of our work is actually preventative in nature. I often find that people are either in one headspace or the other, right? Like, it's cool to hear you talk about, oh no, we do that. Like, we provide kind of like crisis assistance for people, but also we're, maybe this isn't, I just love this metaphor, the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dam, right? Like, or maybe you're the dam, I don't know. But, thinking intentionally longer term of, we can make these investments in people and community and the legal system and actually head off a lot of problems. And probably not just in terms of money, right? And like human suffering, I'm sure is one
Huge.
good metric.
Yeah.
So
There's one sort of common case story that I could share that's, say you've got a single mom who's an LNA, in a care facility, and her apartment has some sort of mold or vermin, and she complains to the landlord. And instead of dealing with the problem, the landlord serves her with an eviction notice.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a point there where we could step in and say, this is clearly a retaliatory eviction. It should be defeated. There's no other reason for this eviction. This has been a model tenancy. And in that case, we're, saving the home for her and her family. If that eviction moved forward, especially in this housing climate, you're going to end up with a family living in their car.
Right.
You're going to end up with kids missing school. You're going to end up with mom losing her job. Things are not going to go on the upswing really easily for that family from here.
Yeah.
And then you have a kid who's, missed out on school. Maybe they're acting up out of fear, frustration, exhaustion. Living in a car is not easy.
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult
Not a
for
great
that kid.
childhood, yeah.
Not a good childhood. And so then you get a kid who's getting, expelled, suspended, expelled. That's the school to prison pipeline.
Right.
And all of that could be traced back to not getting evicted because they complained about mold or vermin in their apartment.
Yeah.
So what we have done over the years, New Hampshire Legal Assistance has been around for 52 years, has really, been behind writing a significant number of the pro-tenant bills that have become law in New Hampshire, protecting the rights of tenants to, safe, habitable living spaces, protecting their rights in what's really, like I said, an imbalance of power.
Yeah.
The property owners have significantly different resources than a
Right.
tenant, especially right now.
Yeah. Well, that's a you commented on this a little bit earlier, and I think it's an interesting thing to kind of get at, right? This, and I kind of want to hear your philosophy on it in a broader way. But like, people have this perception of the law and the legal system as it being absolute, unyielding, right? We even use the word law, as kind of a stand-in for something that does not break, right? Like you
Law of
cannot,
gravity.
right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a law. It can't be trespassed in any way, right? But what you do and what your organization does is you take this thing and you make it, I don't know, more human-oriented, right? Like, I don't think it's correct to say you bend the law, because it's the law. Like, we all have the same. But I think that gets at an attitude that I think a lot of people, particularly Americans, have of, like, there is this belief that, it's simplistic to say there's two-tiered, but everyone knows, if you're really rich, you'll have a better time in the legal system than someone without resources, right? And you kind of push against that inequity.
We try to.
Yeah.
The difference there is whether you can afford someone with the education, experience, expertise, and resources to help you. Because the really rich people aren't doing it on their own.
Right.
They've hired very skilled and experienced advocates. And where I think the concept of the law that you're talking about as this, absolute and determined thing versus something that may not be always applied
Right.
equally. And the difference there is whether you have the resources to protect your rights under the law.
Right.
I do talk about this sometimes, that we can advocate for the fairest and most just laws, but if we don't have a fair and just way of applying them,
Yeah.
then they don't really achieve what we want them to.
Right.
And we have this fair and just way of applying them through our court system. And the problem there is people without resources, people who are living with low income, often don't know that they have rights.
Yeah.
They don't know how to protect their rights. They don't know what the law is that might be protecting them or how to ask someone to enforce it.
Right.
And that's what legal aid is there for, is
Yeah.
to step in and say, yes, you have rights. This is what they are. And yes, we will help you protect them.
I actually really like what you just said, because it's a theory of change. I don't think I personally have never heard, right? Like, there is so much focus on downstream from politics, right? Is this, as you said, maybe this belief that if we can just get the rules right, and sure, there's lots, everyone could think of a million ways they want the law to be changed, right? But you're kind of on the other side saying, a lot of the structure we have now, the structure is sound, but the facilitation, well, maybe not, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but you know what I mean? Like, there is a toolbox to work with in the legal system in terms of, as you say, protecting people's rights, fighting for more fair, just outcomes. But there is we maybe could pay more attention to the execution and the facilitation
Exactly.
of those systems, as opposed to, let's put all our marbles in,
Yeah.
the thing at the top, the people
Yeah.
at the top, right? Like,
Yeah. There's one really great example that's coming to mind when you say that. There's a program in New Hampshire that on paper is just brilliant. It's called the Medicaid. Oh, I'm gonna botch it, but it's called MEAD, MEAD.
Yeah.
And the AD is for adults with disabilities, and
Yeah.
it's basically insurance, medical insurance, covering folks who have disabilities but are working. Medicaid for employed adults with disabilities, I think.
got it.
And the idea is, if you are an adult and you have a disability that hinders you from full-time employment, but you're still engaged in the workforce, which honestly, isn't that what we all want?
Right.
It's so good for people. It's good for society. It's good for people to be engaged in a pursuit that makes them feel valuable and useful. It's good for their mental health. It's often good for their physical health. But if they need an accommodation in terms of not being able to do that 40 hours a week,
Right.
and then therefore often not being eligible for insurance, there's this program that is supposed to help them access Medicaid. And we have found over the past decade that people were being just systematically wrongly denied mead and piling up medical debt,
Right.
which, we talked about it just a minute ago, leads to a cascade of
Yeah,
negative
snowball,
consequences.
right.
Medical debt, it can just sit there on your credit report. It can make it hard to get an apartment, hard to get a home loan. But if we as legal aid step in and appeal that denial, people are much more likely to succeed in that appeal than if they're trying to do it on their own. It's a complicated process. It's a legal process. There are rules,
Right.
and the rules are there. The rules are good, but if no one's there to help you navigate it,
Right.
you're probably not going to get the insurance you need,
Yeah.
which is what's helping these folks stay employed in the first place. It's
Yeah.
this cycle that could be a good cycle if it's used properly.
Right. Yeah. So often, I think society, when we think of issues and problems to be solved, it's like, again, we often think of it in terms of if we can just achieve a, policy victory, whoopee, we're done,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When really maybe most of the, I'm going to mix, there's like a cookie metaphor, you know what I mean? The pudding, the proof that would be in the pudding, right, should be in the execution and the
Implementation.
follow-up,
Yeah,
right,
the
the implementation of it, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, do you see this phenomenon?
We
encounter this a
do. I
lot?
mean, I see more of the failures of the implementation.
Right.
There are definitely people for whom that system and those rules are working.
Yeah.
We see the folks when they're falling through the cracks.
Right.
So I always cling to optimism when I can that
Right.
we're seeing the bad stuff and the good stuff is out there.
Yeah,
But we also have a policy team that's working on making those rules better and working on, making the system on paper
right.
so that then we can, when necessary, step in and help with the implementation and enforcement.
Yeah, yeah.
So trying to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really intelligent approach. It's real good. Like systems change.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that your organization had done some work with refugees, right? From different countries. I think you said Bhutan was, the particular example. And it's fine if you don't have an answer to this because you're more on the fundraising side. But I am curious. There's a disconnect you've talked about between, American citizen, native-born people, right, to the United States, and they even may not understand the full,
Yeah.
Opportunities available to them legally. What is it like interacting with refugees or people who are coming to America the first time?
That's a really interesting question. It is an area where we try to build trust within the community, with leaders, with people who have roles in the community that allow them to sort of walk both sides of life, where they are interacting with the system and with their community. One example that comes to mind is in Concord, in the Bhutanese community, over the past decade or so, there have been, I'm going to back up just a second. So what ends up happening for a lot of refugees as they're working through, the green card and citizenship and the process that is laid out for them, they end up taking a lot of seasonal work, a lot of work where your hours may fluctuate from week to week and from month to month. And wrapped into that is also this, there are supports for them to afford housing. And those supports fluctuate based on your income.
Right.
So the agency that helps you with your housing will pay a certain percent of your rent, and based on your income, you would pay a certain other percent. And so if you earn more one month, you're supposed to pay more of your rent another month. So that's the background.
Yeah.
And what we found were there were some apartment complexes that were not following the rules. Basically, they were charging folks too much rent in the months when their income was down, and they weren't adjusting things properly, and things were going wrong, and or they were going to folks after they had paid rent, saying you owe more, plus there's fees, plus there's interest. You didn't pay enough, and you owe us money.
Right.
And one young person who was in college, fluent English speaker, was able to read those forms, understand what they were asking for, and knew the documentation that he needed to prove that, no, actually, I paid my rent correctly.
Right.
This demand for rent and fees and interest is wrong, and was able to navigate the process to get it dismissed, but then was finding his neighbors who were older, perhaps, or had less, fluency with English, less ability to navigate this paperwork. They were struggling with it. And so he connected them with legal aid to navigate that. And so through having this trusted community partner, that person was able to kind of vouch for legal aid because, from his perspective, his elders and the other people in the community had come from an experience where the legal system was corrupt.
Yeah.
It was dangerous to speak against, a property owner that you were renting from.
Right.
You were not going to get help if you tried to say they were demanding something from you didn't owe.
Yeah.
Might made right in that world.
Yeah.
And there's not been proof to them yet that that's not where they are anymore. He was able to say that's not where you are anymore. There are systems in place where it's about justice. It's not might makes right.
Yeah.
So that's how we navigate into that world, is through a trusted community partner.
Wow. And how much more effective that was than just like, I don't know, giving these people a pamphlet or something, right?
Yeah.
It's like pamphlets are great, but
Yes.
there's more to the human experience and solving problems.
Can I add one more thing?
Of course.
Just on this note.
Yeah.
Legal Aid has also been making, in the past 2 or 3 years, a really concentrated effort to add non-English speaking staff, or staff who speak languages other than English. And so we now have a paralegal who speaks Hindi. There are intake staff who speak French, Portuguese, so many Spanish, so many other languages, because we're recognizing that there is this need for people to be served in the language that they're most comfortable with. And it's a way of helping them become comfortable with the legal process and with the staff that's there to help them. So it's been super exciting to watch that and to watch this attention being paid to that.
Yeah. Man, that's cool. That's kind of one of my favorite maybe not underreported, but there are a lot of like refugee communities in New Hampshire, a lot of immigrant communities in New Hampshire, and it's maybe not traditionally a place you would imagine a lot of that to be or to happen, but it is, and it's a really cool.
It is. Oh my gosh, the future of food in Concord is in sort of bringing new flavors and new opportunities for people to share food with each other and bring that cultural connection.
Yeah.
And it's so exciting to see it. But yeah, it's definitely kind of under the stereotypes of what Concord is.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's wonderful to hear. Like, there's so much to gain, right, from helping people feel welcome and at home and like they can build a life here, right? To say nothing of the great cuisine we're all going to get, down the line, right? But, I like hearing you talk about your work because it gets at, one of the great themes of the optimism stuff. And what I'm trying to promote is like this, not a zero sum. Like we actually all win when,
Yes.
the legal system works better,
Yes.
when people take advantage of their rights, right? Like you would not prefer the alternative where less of that is the case.
Yeah.
You know?
I know one of our projects we haven't talked about is our work protecting victims and survivors of domestic violence. So one of the classic stories our former chairman used to share is a pro bono case that he took. So he was an attorney in private practice who would volunteer time to represent someone who's going through a divorce or needs a protective order. Those are civil cases, and in civil cases, you're not guaranteed an attorney. So that's kind of the crux of what it is that I do. And this client of his worked at a car dealership in kind of a front office area. And you've been to a car dealership. The windows are huge.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of reasons for that. But from this client's perspective, is incredibly vulnerable. And she was so anxious sitting in front of those big windows, knowing that her, former partner wished her harm.
Yeah, he could see.
Could
right.
see where she was at any moment. It was impacting her job performance.
Right.
And so it's one of those, it's a less high-minded notion about why access to justice is important, but it
Right.
really is like helping people be their best selves in any circumstance by resolving these civil legal problems that they have. So
Yeah.
helping someone get a protective order that keeps their abuser a certain distance away from them is
Right.
going to help them focus on the task at hand, whether that's work or parenting or anything else that they're trying to do. Resolving the civil legal problem is the first step
Right.
in moving forward.
Yeah. Man, and that's like, who would ever think of that about big windows and visibility unless like you'd been
Unless you've been threatened.
yeah, a situation where you don't want people to know you're there. Gosh.
Yeah, a lot of people don't even know the things that are civil legal issues,
Right.
which is another huge part of like kind of just the awareness about what we do. But there's so many things that people face that could have a resolution
Yeah.
if they only knew that they had a civil legal case to make. So we've talked about a lot of them. Housing is really a big one.
Right.
These domestic violence and civil protective orders are kind of the other one. I talk about them as our bread and butter
Right.
in terms of the load of our work. But yeah, appealing the denial of those Mead benefits.
Yeah.
That's something where there's an appeal process. And if you can qualify, then you can get a legal advocate.
There is something stereotypically, very American, right, about like people, maybe like lawfare, right, but this idea that, oh, we're a very legally oriented country that, you can take things to court and say, I'll sue you, right? Like these are things that have maybe arisen because of American pop culture, but there is a kind of truth in it, right? And maybe even something, I don't know if patriotic is the right word, but civic minded,
Yes.
right? That
Yes.
you have rights and you can exercise them and get better outcomes for yourself if you become aware and educated and if you need it, get the right support,
Exactly.
right?
Yes, it's a deeply patriotic cause, I think, because it's what makes America America.
Yeah.
It's what we were founded on, was this equality before the law, that the law exists not to protect the mighty, but to protect people who are vulnerable, who need protection.
Right.
And that everyone has the opportunity to go before an impartial judge and make their case. And the problem is that over time, it's become a complicated system. And even not over time, probably from the very beginning, it was
Right.
terrifying to step into a courtroom
Yeah.
from day one.
Right.
I can't imagine that was not scary to anyone at the beginning, too.
Sure.
It's scary now. And one of the ways that we help folks is, that 7,400 folks that we've helped includes people who called the 603 Legal Aid hotline. And that's not the phone number. I know it sounds like a phone number. That's
Right.
the organization's name.
Yeah.
And so they called the intake line, and their case was super urgent in terms of time. It was coming up really quickly, and there was no way that a staff attorney was going to be able to represent them in that case. But they were able to connect with a staff advocate who could tell them super basic things that would help them calm down enough to maybe represent themselves.
Yeah.
That is still what happens for a large number of people that we work with. They still end up representing themselves, but after engaging with legal aid, they know things like what side of the courtroom to stand on.
Yeah.
Who's going to get to speak first? What should you bring with you for evidence? Make sure you have copies.
Yeah.
All those things that if you don't get it right can really derail the case. But if you just know those simple things,
Yeah.
the confidence people have when they go into court is so different. The way they carry themselves, prepping an outline of what they're going to say, working through that with a staff member,
Yeah.
even if they have to do the actual speaking themselves,
Right.
having that idea that someone has your back is life-changing.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing.
I love talking about this.
Yeah. No, it's clear you're passionate about it. It's wonderful to hear. You shared some really cool stuff with me the other day about some things that are going on lately with your organization.
Yeah.
You said the state has recently extended and expanded a pilot project that lets paralegals do more for clients.
Yes.
Can you dig into that a
Huge.
little bit?
I would love to. 2 years ago, New Hampshire was at really the forefront of this. There were maybe 9 states investigating this expansion of paralegal duties. And again, it's a little bit of a metaphor from the medical community where we've seen an expansion of work that can be done by registered nurses, by physician's assistants. It doesn't discount the work that's done by doctors. There's still a role for doctors, but there are some things that can be handled by other professionals who have been trained and are supervised. And we're adapting that to the legal profession by saying there are some kinds of cases where some service is better than no service, where the service is, in some sense, prescribed.
Yeah.
There's certain steps to take to get a protective order. It's very formulaic, and it's something that a trained paralegal can do. It's something that, in our case, over the past 2 years, trained paralegals have been doing with incredible success.
Yeah.
And what we really wanted this session was the chance to have 5 more years proving this out. Like you said, the proof is in the pudding. The proof
Yeah.
is going to be in the number of people that are going to be able to be served, because there is only one legal aid attorney for every 10,000 people in need in our state.
Wow.
We're not going to meet the need with
Yeah.
attorneys. But what we could do, because there is a much bigger, more diverse, it's much more of an open door of opportunity for people to become a certified paralegal.
Yeah.
We can meet some more of the need by employing a more flexible workforce.
Yeah.
So we're just really excited. It was at first, for those first 2 years, in 3 courts in the state, in Concord, Manchester, and
Nashua. I'm just
no,
guessing.
it wasn't. It was either Berlin or Franklin.
Tamworth, New Hampshire.
Yeah, we're going to need to edit that chunk out. I can't believe I forgot where the other one was. But anyway, it's going to be now in all courts in
Yeah.
the state, and it's going to be for the next 5 years. So we're really, we have buy-in from the court system. The Access to Justice Commission of the Supreme Court was behind this in the beginning, and they're behind the extension and the expansion. And we have this fantastic retired judge, state legislator, who has seen from the bench what it's like when people are trying to represent themselves in housing court or in family court, and has seen what's possible if we were to open the doors a little bit for
Yeah.
people with training and with supervision from an attorney to step in and give people some representation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So exciting.
I mean, that seems like a big deal.
It really is. It's one of those things that's like on paper sounds kind of dry, but
Right.
like I said, it's gaining nationwide recognition as a way forward.
Yeah.
So there's now, in the past 2 years since New Hampshire adopted the very first narrow pilot project, it's gone from 9 to 16 or 17 states that are investigating or implementing this.
Yeah. Well, that's a cool thing, too, because I imagine, like all laws, right, there was an original intention that was probably, someone thought they were doing the right thing, right? Of, maybe, and you could tell me how wrong this is, but I figure maybe there was a rule where it's like, no, if people are going to get legal help, it needs to be from a trained lawyer, right? Like, we wouldn't want any other way.
Right.
But, this is what you would want to see, is the legal system adapting to
Yeah.
itself, right? Of saying
Exactly.
this was intended to help people, but it is now actually an impediment
Yeah.
to people getting the support that they need, right? And this is democracy, right? Like it's messy, it changes, it's a long-term kind of thing, but that's really cool to see that there's a recent reform that is going to be a big game changer
Yeah.
for your work.
Yeah.
You also shared with me recently that Dartmouth Health, actually, that's my medical provider.
Nice.
I go to Dartmouth Hitchcock. Or actually, was that Dartmouth College or Dartmouth?
It's Dartmouth Health.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I figured. They extended a project, placing an attorney on site at a program for mothers in recovery from substance misuse, because a civil legal issue like eviction or losing access to food stamps could jeopardize their family stability or their sobriety and issues of that nature.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
It is such a great project. It's exactly the kind of collaboration I talked about with the refugee community. It's the same idea of turning to trusted community partners where people are already engaged and invested and have built trust and strong relationships. So our attorney on this project, his name is Jonathan, and he goes once a week to a clinic that serves moms and their families as they navigate kind of the early days of sobriety, those early months that are super crucial for them. And he works with the staff in their staff meeting on what are some of the things you're hearing from folks. Has someone, a lot of the times it's those cases I talked about where there's been substandard housing issues that someone has complained about and that have resulted in retaliatory actions from the property owner. So he will be able to step in and help navigate that so that that family in this crucial, tenuous, really moment of balancing a little bit on a knife's edge,
Right.
so that they can stay housed. It's so important.
Yeah.
There's also, a question of whether someone might be losing their health benefits, their health care, their food stamps is super important for folks because there's just so many pennies you can pinch in a situation where you're just getting back on your feet.
Right.
So he's built relationships now and educated the healthcare staff to recognize when something that a client is bringing in might have a civil legal remedy, something like mold in an apartment. Okay, let's say you have a mom who's bringing the kid in because they've got this cough that just won't go away.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to, diagnose this kiddo with asthma, treat the health issue, but let's ask the question of, is there mold in the house?
Right.
Okay, well, have you talked to the property owner about this? Because, they need to remediate that. They need to help you solve that issue. And if you do and things go sideways with that relationship, that's when you have a legal right to a safe and habitable home that we can help protect.
Yeah.
So that's that kind of downstream preventative work.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, it's so exciting.
There are sides of these issues you would never even think about, right?
Yeah,
As a
and when I
layperson.
reached out, I was like, any one of these could be a great person to have on your show.
Yeah.
Any one of these they could spend an hour talking about
I
what they're
know.
doing and how it's solving problems for folks in their community. So
Right.
we get to just talk about all of them at once.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's like a cheat code.
Yeah.
I remember when I was first talking to you about coming on the show, you gave me like 6 different people, and I was like, is there anyone who could just talk about all of it? Just as like a highlight. Not that I would. I'd love to get into
Yeah.
all of them, but just like let's begin with just one. And you're like, I could do that. And I was like, all right,
Yeah.
let's have you come on.
Yeah, I get to sort of skate along and hear the success stories from everyone.
Right.
While they do like the really hard stuff.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the purview of being an armchair,
Yes.
podcaster. I don't actually do anything myself, but
Oh,
I
I don't
interview
know.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I talk to people who do. I don't know. I treat my dog really well. I spoil the heck out of him.
All right.
That makes the world better.
You know what? Yeah, you're making a difference.
Yeah. So
I have some. I know this is sort of like the good news segment.
No.
So like I've got news.
tell me.
Yeah, the news would be that 603 Legal Aid. So I've talked a little bit about New Hampshire Legal Assistance.
Mm-hmm.
I also work with 603 Legal Aid, which is a separate organization doing some of the work that I've talked about.
Yeah.
Is 603 Legal Aid work. And the news there is there's some really exciting funding coming in. So there are these foundations that receive awards when there's like a big lawsuit against like a corporation or something, and those are called CyPray awards. And the foundations then use CyPray money to make solutions. That's the idea. Is okay, this judgment was issued against someone for being a bad actor. Let's take the winnings or the result of that case and put it to use doing good stuff.
Yeah.
So 603 Legal Aid's received some CyPray money to implement a specific veterans project. So it's really directed at veterans homelessness. So it's a combination of kind of some federal money through the VA, directed specifically at helping veterans understand that they have a legal right in a situation that they're facing and finding the legal remedy for it.
Yeah.
Specifically around housing, making sure that they're safe and housed. And then the other one is a consumer law unit, which is kind of a new concept driven by a needs assessment that we did of the state a couple years ago, really asking people in the community, what is it you need? What is going on that you're facing? What are some problems you're facing that might have a legal remedy? And consumer debt driven by medical debt was one of the biggest needs. It was the most frequently cited problem. So we're responsive. We want to
Right.
be here to fix the problems people are facing. So super excited. And those are about to be implemented. So I can't talk yet to what they're achieving.
Yeah.
But the news is we're doing it.
Yeah,
and
no.
we're so excited.
You're growing. You're doing new stuff.
Exactly.
How cool is that too? That like I used to read a lot and know some folks who worked in like the international development kind of poverty alleviation world, and this has been kind of a similar sea change attitude of like the approach used to be, all right, some people in a think tank in New York will decide what is best for some folks in rural Uganda, right? And no one ever thought to just go and like ask the people
them,
how
yeah.
how best to help you, right? So this
Yeah.
this kind of consumer,
Yeah.
bottom up
Yeah.
approach of like, well, maybe we should just ask people and design around that. I feel like is a really good idea.
Yeah, it was a huge undertaking because it was during the pandemic. So there's a lot of phone and online surveys, and of course, the scare around your health and the concern about the COVID pandemic was definitely top of mind for folks. But under that, housing, debt, and access to protections for folks dealing with domestic violence were just the top things that people were saying they needed, and that's what we're going to work on.
Yeah. Well, we're almost at time, so there are two questions I feel obligated to ask you.
Okay.
One, what's your opinion on the movie Legally Blonde? And two, what very important.
Yes.
Tell me what makes you optimistic about the future of your work.
Okay. So taking the hard one first, my opinion of the movie Legally Blonde is that it's fantastic. I've gotten really protective over the years of my attorneys. I'm not an attorney. I was, a journalist by training, and come in and I harbor no space for, bad lawyer jokes.
Right.
The attorneys I know are absolutely uncaped superheroes. They make life possible for people. So Legally Blonde, I feel like the folks that I've talked to are actually lawyers. Like, it's one of those ones that's actually kind of a decent representation of.
Interesting.
I know my cousin Vinny is actually the one that folks cite as like really good representation.
My
of
wife is
being
watching
an attorney.
that movie tonight.
I
with our
love
friend.
that movie
Yeah.
anyway. And then to hear from like my attorney friends that it's actually a really good representation of how you go about researching a case, developing, the case law, and also just like how to behave in a courtroom and how
Right.
many things can go wrong. Like, it's a great example. So that's my lawyers in movies situation.
We could do a whole episode
I know,
just about
lawyers
that.
in movies. Yeah, I know. And then
I'll
like
have you
there's,
back.
I didn't even get to make my classic joke around what people know about, what people know about the law they learned from Law and Order. And it's just, that's one side of it. That's just
Right.
the criminal law.
Yeah,
Everything I've talked about is civil law, and you aren't guaranteed an attorney in civil cases like you are in criminal cases. But yeah.
Oh,
it's
so
all-
the whole, if you
Your
cannot afford
Miranda-
a lawyer,
Yes.
it will be afforded to you or whatever.
Dun dun.
Yeah.
That's my joke.
Okay.
My Law and Order joke. So that's just for civil cases. Miranda rights are just in criminal cases.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty big misconception.
I
to clear
know.
up.
I should have said that right off the
No,
top.
I mean, we're covering it right now.
Right now. Yes. The Miranda rights are just for criminal cases. You're entitled to an attorney
Right.
when your liberty is at stake, when you
Yeah.
might go to jail.
Yeah.
But when things like justice or your housing, your kids,
Right.
that kind of stuff, you're on your own, or you can try and get a legal aid attorney.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as what makes me optimistic about my work, I mean, definitely the paralegal pilot project. I'm so excited to talk about that with anyone who will listen. I think it's going to allow us to hire more people and put them in more places. It's also just a really great way to bring in, as I talked about, folks who speak other languages and come from other communities. It's a lower barrier to entry than traditional law school path.
Yeah.
And so it's a way for legal aid to be more representative of the communities that we're trying to serve.
Perfect.
It's hugely exciting.
Well, I love everything that you shared with me today.
This has been so much fun.
And this is a really cool organization that I'm glad people got to learn more about it.
Yeah, thank you for the chance to
I'd
talk about it.
Love to have you back sometime because I feel like we just barely scratched the
barely.
surface.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you very much, Sarah, for coming on.
Thank
Granite Goodness.
you.
Elle Woods in the flesh.
Not me.
Hey there. Thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Recording space was provided by Treeline Outfitters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator of Granite Goodness and the host of the Granite Goodness podcast, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.